So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and in this session, we will continue our previous sessions on valuation concerns. So, in the previous session, we talked about the three most important approaches to the valuation of a company. Like, whenever we are doing the valuation of a company, be it any kind of investment banking company, the top investment banking companies also, the major approach that they used for the valuation of the companies, there are the three major approaches used by those people. The first approach that they talk about is the income approach. The second approach that they talk about is your comparables approach or the company's comparable approach or the relative valuation approach. And the third approach that they talk about is the asset based valuation approach. So these are the major three approaches on which the valuation analysis is done by top investment bankers or financial analysts. So we started our discussion on the income approach. And when we talked about the income approach, we talked about the three methods like within the income approach. So the first approach, the income approach, is the main heading. And within that income approach, we have three subheadings. Now those three subheadings are a discounted cash flow or the DCF analysis, you have the capitalization method, and you have the profit discounting method. The most widely used method in the income approach is your discounted cash flow analysis, right? So we talked about the DCF analysis. And when we talked about the DCF analysis, we got to know that in the case of DCF analysis, we want to know the present value of a company by discounting the future cash flows. Our first step was to project the future cash flows of the company. And when we projected the future cash flows of the company, we discounted the future cash flows of the company at a discount rate or the interest rate. That interest rate is nothing but the weighted average cost of capital or the cost of capital or the overall cost of capital as you call it. So now the question arose that what do we mean by the weighted average cost of capital or WACC? So by WACC, we basically mean the minimum return expected on our investment. The minimum total return to all the capital providers. And now your capital providers can be in terms of your equity holders, your debt holders, and various other sources of finance. The equity shareholders will want a percentage return on their investment on their shares or the equity shares that they have purchased. The debt holders will want a certain return on their investment in the form of the interest payment that the company who has borrowed the money is guaranteeing for the same. So when we discount the future cash flows on the basis of the discounting rate or using the discounting technique, we calculate the present value of the cash flows. And then we add the present value of the cash flows. And once we add the present value of the cash flows, like we get the total present value. And then in that example, like where we got the present value of 23,992, we assumed that we had invested 20,000 rupees into the company. So if we had invested 20,000 rupees into the company, our net present value is 3,992 rupees. Why? Because our sum of the present values was more than the investment value, and that is a major concern that we want. Our investment must be able to give us some return, and that was approximately a return of 20%. Because ultimately, like this is showing that if we are investing 20,000 rupees at the present scenario, after 5 years, that 20,000 rupees will give us at least 15 or 20% of return. Why? Because the net present value what? Because a net present value is greater than the investment amount. Okay. So this was the first approach that we talked about, the discounted cash flow analysis. And in the discounted cash flow analysis, I also told you about one thing. And the one thing was the interest rate or the discount rate that we are talking about. Okay. If that interest rate or discount rate rises, the future value of the cash flows will be discounted at a higher rate. And as a result, the present value of the firm might be low. As we can see in the present scenario, when the US is planning to increase its bond yields, the interest rate is increasing. And the risk-free rate on the US securities play a vital role in determining the discount rate or the interest rate or the weighted average cost of capital. So higher the interest rate, these growth companies or IT companies or platform tech companies or startup tech platform companies, as like whatsoever you call it, we see them getting discounted at a very high rate. And as a result, their valuation reduces and the share price also comes down. Because ultimately, when we talk about the enterprise value contains all your equity, your debt, your minority interest minus the cash amount, which we talked in the yesterday session also. That is, we talked about the differences like between the market capitalization and your enterprise value. So coming back to that once again, so when we talk about the market capitalization, your market capitalization, it just take into consideration the equity shares of the company. That is the free floating equity shares which are available for buying and selling by the people and not by the promoters. Because the shares that are held by the promoters are the locked in shares, right? Those are the locked in shares by the promoters which are not available for buying and selling. So the free floating shares in the market into the price of the share is the total market capitalization of the firm. And that is nothing but your market capitalization, which takes into consideration only the equity value. The second concept that we try to understand was about the enterprise value. So when we talk about the enterprise value, it takes into consideration both the equity component and the debt component, also the minority interest also. So what exactly is minority interest? People holding shares in the company or having a stake in the company for less than 20% are the minority holders. So you have the equity component plus the debt component plus the minority interest component, adding all that, and then we used to subtract the cash from that. And I asked you a simple question also, okay, would you accept a company having a positive enterprise value or a negative enterprise value? Then we came to the conclusion that we would always accept a company having a negative enterprise value, because when can a company have a negative EV? When the cash is more than the equity amount, the debt amount, the minority interest amount. It means the company has more amount to repay the debt. Also, the company has more cash than equity, तो company को बाहर के sources of finance raise करने की need ही नहीं है, right? So coming back, if the future cash flows are discounted by a lower rate, as we have seen in the previous parts, like when the interest rate were too low, the real yields were almost negative and all, right? At that point of time, the valuation of the company increases, and why at that time a large number of startup platform loss-making companies get listed because they can command a higher valuation. Okay. After that, like we talked about what we talked about the capitalization method. So basically, when we talk about the capitalization method, so in the capitalization method, it's basically used for the mature companies, and the discounted cash flow or the DCF method is used for the growth companies. But it is only on a theoretical basis, because we can see like when we talk about on a theoretical basis about the mature companies, it is said that the only option available with the mature companies is to go to the liquidation and let the other companies come to that stage, because these companies are not growing and are in a period of stagnation or consolidation. But is it really true in the present scenario? Is it really true in the present scenario? No. We can see that top companies like Tata, Reliance, HCL, Britannia are still growing. So this concept only works in a theoretical manner. Okay. Give me a second for connectivity issue. Yeah, now it's connected back. Yeah. So we can see that the difference between the capitalization approach and the DCF approach, it's only valid in a theoretical manner. That is why a large number of financial analysts and even all the investment bankers, they tend to use what? They tend to use a DCF analysis only. Okay. That is the one concern that you should know. Okay. So this approach that you need to know that 99.9% of the financial analysts are using your discounted cash flow analysis rather than the capitalization approach. The third approach, which is not used by anyone, is the profit discounting approach. That is, we're trying to predict the future profits of the company and then discounting the profit at a same discount rate. Okay, so that is one thing that also goes on. Okay, but out of that, you need to know the profit can be a manipulative figure. And why the profit can be a manipulative figure? The profit can be the manipulative figure. Like, for example, if I bought something from someone and sold at a profit to a customer, and I made 100 rupees profit, and my customer is yet to give me that 100 rupees. But in my profit and loss statement or the income statement, I will still show a profit of 100 rupees only, no matter I have received the cash or not. But in the cash flow statement, this 100 rupees will be shown only when I receive this 100 rupees actually. So that is why the cash flow statement is an improvement or the betterment over the profit and loss statement, and that you need to know. Okay. That is one thing you should know with us. Okay, so that is the scenario for which you should be like very clear about. ठीक है, तो प्रॉफिट अप्रोच हमें यूज नहीं करनी है बिकॉज दैट अप्रोच इज नॉट सो गुड. ठीक है, दैट इज समथिंग यू कैन थिंक फॉर. राइट. The second approach that we talked about was the comparables approach or the relative valuation approach. So when we talked about the comparable approach or the relative valuation approach, so basically we are using the multiples here, the two types of multiples, transaction multiples you are using here, and the second type of multiple that you are using here is what your multiples, dealing multiples or comparable company multiples. In transaction multiples, like you use for the purpose of mergers, acquisitions, arbitrations, and all those stuff, your EV to EBITDA ratios or EV and all. And then we talked about your P multiple ratio, your P, PB, and revenue multiples. Also, we talked about the EV to sales, price to sales, and all those things, right? So we talked about these multiples, and the third approach for which we had the discussion was about the asset-based approach. So when we talk about the asset-based approach, like first of all, like before we start about the asset-based approach, the one thing that you should understand is P ratio can be used for all the industries, the price to earning ratio. Whereas the price to book value ratio should be used for those industries which are asset intensive that have assets. For example, real estate industries, construction industries, cement industries, because these have assets. We cannot use the PB ratio for in the case of the IT industry. In that case, the PB ratio would be so high and the company might be overvalued. So that is the thing. Okay, so that thing you should take into consideration as well. Okay. Okay, so that is like when we talk about the PB ratio. So talking about the asset-based method. So as the asset-based method of valuation, like when we talk about the asset-based method of valuation is basically concerning all the valuation techniques or can be used for those companies that basically have assets with itself. We cannot use like this method of valuation for like the IT industries or software industries or platform companies, right? So this one thing that is very much clear for you. Okay, that must be used. So as basically the name is suggesting, asset based. Okay, so it is quite clear it can be used only for those companies which are asset based and not for like any other kind of industries. Okay, so like when we talk about the asset based method of valuation, the first method that we talk about is your book value method or the simply book value method. Talk about the book value method. So when we talk about this book value method, it is also called simply your equity value method. So let's talk about this method. Like for example, you are going for the purpose of mergers and acquisition. Like for example, your company is A and you want to acquire a company B. Okay. So this method is basically when you are acquiring that company B, you're gonna acquire it on the basis of the book value. And what is book value? The cost price of the asset or the cost of acquisition of that company's asset minus depreciation का मान लो कि cost of machinery that your target company acquired at like was like 1 lakh rupees, उस कंपनी में 50,000 का डेप्रिसिएशन उस मशीनरी पर चार्ज अब तक हो चुका है and the current value of that machinery is 50,000 rupees. Then you're gonna purchase that the assets of that company at 50,000 rupees, मतलब that particular machinery for 50,000 rupees. And the same calculation will be done for all the other assets and the liabilities of the company, right? And that is the book value method, that you are not making changes as per the market rate. तो उस कंपनी को 50,000 रुपीज के जो मान लो उसका एक एसेट हुआ लाइक 50,000 रुपीज, like similarly with like with the same calculation, your price minus the depreciation, एक एसेट का प्राइस हुआ 40,000 रुपीज एंड 30,000 रुपीज, तो उसी प्राइस पे तुम उस कंपनी को खरीद रहे हो एंड यू आर नॉट मेकिंग एनी एडजस्टमेंट्स एज पर द मार्केट रेट. सिमिलरली हो सकता है कि कंपनी ने डेट लिया लाइक 50 लाख रुपीज का, आउट ऑफ दैट द कंपनी हैज पेड लाइक 30 लाख रुपीज का डेट पे कर चुकी है एंड 20 लाख इज लेफ्ट. सो 20 lakh will be assumed by you or absorbed by you. For assets, you can use the term purchasing. Okay, so that is the scenario you'll be purchasing that. That is a thing that you should use. Okay, so that must be like clear to you. Okay, the second method that we talk about is your adjusted book value method. We talk about is your adjusted book value method. इसमें you are making certain adjustments as per the market rate. In your adjusted book value method, you are making certain adjustments as per the market rate. ठीक है, मतलब अगर ये 50,000 रुपीज की मशीनरी है, उस टारगेट कंपनी बी को व्हेन यू आर एक्वायरिंग दैट कंपनी, प्राइस वाज 1 लाख रुपीज और दैट मशीनरी, उस पर 50,000 रुपीज 5 साल में 4 साल 5 साल में लाइक डेप्रिसिएशन चार्ज हो चुका है एंड जस्ट रिमेनिंग 50,000 रुपीज इज लेफ्ट, मतलब उसकी 50,000 रुपीज इज एज पर देयर बुक वैल्यू. The book value is also called your carrying value. तो as per their books, it is 50,000 rupees. But हो सकता है मार्केट में उसकी वैल्यू 70,000 रुपीज की स्टिल हो, बिकॉज वो डेप्रिसिएशन वी हैव अकाउंटेड एज पर आर मेथड्स, बट वो सेम मशीनरी की मार्केट में वैल्यू इज लाइक 70,000 रुपीज. So then we'll have to buy that asset for 70,000 rupees and same goes for all the other assets and liabilities. तो इसका the drawback is कि कंपनी को महंगे में खरीदना पड़ रहा है. But if the value is 40,000 rupees मान के चलो या 30,000 rupees मान के चलो, तो that's the benefit, तुम्हें कंपनी को सस्ते में खरीदना पड़ रहा है. But at that time it can be a drawback also because assets को बेच के जो तुम उसकी कंपनी की liabilities को settle करोगे, because ultimately when you have acquired that company, उस कंपनी की liabilities are your liabilities. And you'll have to pay for your liabilities also. And in most of the scenarios, people sell off the assets of that company, that is the target company, because the other company which is acquiring that target company already has its own assets, right? तो उसको तो कोई प्रॉब्लम होनी ही नहीं है, तो वो सेल ऑफ करके उस कंपनी की मतलब की लाइबिलिटीज को मतलब कि क्लियर कर देगा एंड वैल्यू अनलॉकिंग का प्रोसेस स्टार्ट हो जाएगा. ठीक है, मतलब लाइक उस कंपनी में कुछ वैल्यू डाल देंगे और अच्छी, ताकि वो कंपनी और अच्छा परफॉर्म कर सके. तो उसमें अगर एसेट्स का अमाउंट कम है तो इट कैन हैपन कि लाइबिलिटीज भी कम अमाउंट से सेटल. बट अगर ज्यादा है तो ऑब्वियसली यू आर परचेजिंग द कंपनी महंगे में, बट फिर एसेट्स की वैल्यू भी तो ज्यादा है, देन फिर लाइबिलिटीज भी ज्यादा अमाउंट से सेटल हो पाएंगी. एट द एंड अ लेसर अमाउंट ऑफ लाइबिलिटीज वुड बी लेफ्ट. ओके, अब क्वेश्चन आता है हाउ यू गोना डू द सेम स्टफ फॉर लाइक लाइबिलिटीज के केस में. दैट बेसिकली हैपेंस इन केस ऑफ लाइक एक्सपोर्ट इंपोर्ट के केस में ज्यादा होता है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर $1 की वैल्यू इज लाइक 75 रुपीज, लाइक जस्ट एज्यूम द वैल्यू ऑफ लाइक $1 इज लाइक 75 रुपीज. ठीक है, अगर मुझे एक्सपोर्ट कर रहा हूँ, मतलब मुझको पैसा मिलना है, एक्सपोर्ट बाहर सामान बेच रहा हूँ, लाइक मुझको पैसा मिलना है, तो आई वुड वॉन्ट वॉट, आई वुड वॉन्ट माई ओन करेंसी टू डेप्रिशिएट. मैं बोलूंगा $1 की वैल्यू 76 हो जाए ताकि मुझको ज्यादा पैसा मिले. इन दैट केस लाइक दिस एडजस्टमेंट इज मेड, राइट. बट अगर मैं इम्पोर्टर हूं, मुझको पैसा देना है, मैंने कुछ बाहर से खरीदा है तो मुझको पेमेंट करनी है इन डॉलर्स, तो आई वुड वॉन्ट माई करेंसी टू अप्रिशिएट. मतलब $1 लाइक 74 का हो जाए, 73 का हो जाए, 72 का हो जाए, 60 का हो जाए. इन दैट केस आई हैव टू पे लेस. सो दैट इज द सिनारियो जब एक मतलब कि लाइक एक्सपोर्ट इम्पोर्ट ट्रांजैक्शन की लाइबिलिटीज हाउ दे आर सेटल्ड. ओके. द थर्ड मेथड दैट वी टॉक अबाउट is your replacement method. So what are you doing in the replacement method? Like you are basically replacing the assets of a company. For example, if the value of the machinery was like 1 lakh rupees and अब उसकी value मान लो कि depreciation charge करके जो भी है as per the market is like 50,000 rupees, and same machinery like you want to buy from the market. अब 1 लाख की मशीनरी शायद ना मिले because of inflation and all. Like you went to the market and you bought the machinery for 2 lakh rupees. Will that machinery like really cost you like 2 lakh rupees? No. If you exchange this machinery, cost of producing a similar asset, replacement method, तो 50,000 rupees इसमें से तो minus कर दोगे, that machinery will just cost you like 1,50,000 rupees. Okay, so that is something that you should know about. ठीक है. The fourth method that we talk about is a liquidation method. So when you talk about the liquidation method, in liquidation method में क्या, अगर तुम कंपनी के एसेट्स को बेच रहे हो like to settle your liabilities, then वो किस प्राइस पे बिकेंगे? Simple, because the liquidation is a terminology which is basically used for the process of winding up, and like the company is getting over, कंपनी खत्म हो रही है, मतलब कि उस प्रोसेस में. In that process you call it as a liquidation method कि कंपनी अगर खत्म हो रही है तो बेचने के लिए कंपनी के पास कितने एसेट्स हैं. So that is the scenario that you should take into consideration. So these are the four methods like which are basically used for the asset-based method. Companies tend to use your adjusted book value method भी use करती हैं, वो book value method भी use करती हैं, replacement भी use करते हैं, and liquidation भी use करते हैं. It is as per the company की कंपनी को कौन सा method use करना है. But if someone asks you कि मान लो like which approach takes into consideration market value. So obviously you have the adjusted book value approach and your replacement value approach. It takes into consideration market value. Okay. So that is like when we talk about the asset based valuation approach. एक approach like people talk about, they talk about the options approach. Or they call it as the contingent claim approach. It's the same, the options approach or the contingent claim approach. Okay, so when they're talking about the options approach or the contingent claim approach, see, for just now, like you must have a certain knowledge about the derivatives, strike price, spot price, time to maturity, expiration date, and all those stuff. So, like we'll talk about the derivatives in a kind of a separate session, like where we talk about all these terminologies. But to have the basic understanding about that, the thing that you should know about this is that अगर आप contingent claim approach की बात कर रहे हो ना, if we are talking about the contingent claim approach, the thing is कि yeah, you have an option to delay your investment or abandon your investment for a certain period of time. लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर कोई कंपनी एक लॉस मेकिंग कंपनी है जिसकी कैश फ्लोज है -4,000 रुपीज, फिर आगे जाके अगर तुम प्रोजेक्ट भी कर रहे हो तो तुमको लग रहा है कि -2,000 हो जाएंगे, देन -1,000 हो जाएंगे, एक पॉइंट पे -90 हो जाएंगे, एक पॉइंट पे 0 होंगे, देन फिर एक पॉजिटिव स्टार्ट होंगे 10, 20, 30. So instead of investing at this point where the company has hugely negative cash flows and तुम्हारी जो investment value है like वो भी मतलब कि खतरे में होगी, instead of investing at this point you have an option to invest at 0 or like -90 or 10k amount per. So at this point you have an option to delay your investment. In that case the net present value of your investment will also be positive, right? अगर तुम यहाँ पे invest करोगे, your net present value it might be hugely negative. Similarly, this approach is also used for the valuation of mining companies or the oil extraction companies because maybe the weather condition might not be suitable at that time. Okay, तो वहाँ पे हो सकता है they have an option to like delay their investment or like delay their extraction and all. ठीक है, तो वहाँ पर भी तुम्हारा ये options and contingent claim method use हो सकता है. Even for the valuations of your patents and copyrights, like this method can also be used for the valuation of your patents and copyrights also. ठीक है, तो पेटेंट्स एंड कॉपीराइट्स की जब हम बात करते हैं फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ वैल्यूइंग योर पेटेंट्स एंड कॉपीराइट, इवन योर डीसीएफ मेथड कैन बी यूज्ड. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, लाइक यू थिंक हैव अ पेटेंट कॉपीराइट ट्रेडमार्क लोगो एंड जहाँ से तुमको लगता है कि तुम्हारी कंपनी को वैल्यू मिल रही है और तुम्हारी कंपनी को पैसा आ रहा है, सो दैट थिंग कैन ऑल्सो बी टेकन बाय यूजिंग द डीसीएफ एनालिसिस. ओके, एक भी टॉक अबाउट योर सम ऑफ पार्ट्स वैल्यूएशन होता है. If you want to like dig deep into the processes of valuation, give me a second. One you have as a sum of parts valuation. उसमें क्या होता है, like instead of valuing the whole company, like for example if Nestle is your target company, then Nestle को तुम पूरा वैल्यू करने के एक बारी में it's better to value it's like milk business separately, like valuing all the segments separately of Nestle. Milk business को तुम separately करो, then like they have the nutrition business को तुम separately करो, like cookies business को separately करो, the medicine business को separately करो, so all those businesses are valued separately. ठीक है, इसकी एक सेपरेट वैल्यू आएगी, इसकी एक सेपरेट वैल्यू आएगी, इसकी एक सेपरेट वैल्यू आएगी, इसकी एक सेपरेट वैल्यू आएगी. And once you have the separate value for all these, add them, and once you add this, you get the total value of Nestle. That is the sum of parts valuation. Okay, so that's all for today. I'll see you in the next